HAX Show, Ep.5, big one. The universe didn't want us to record today.
No.
But we are going to record. I'm sitting down with Lawrence van Lingen. Lawrence is the reason we have this podcast. It is the studios in his house, so we're very grateful to have him on today. But on a more personal note, Lawrence has been sort of my run guru, my good friend, and the guy that has brought me back from the dead the last 2 years behind the scenes. Lawrence, thank you so much for talking to me today. I wanted to start by reading a quote. You'll know this quote, but it sort of really encapsulates a lot of how our relationship started and sort of how we started working together. So the quote is, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us." The quote goes on, but I just want to leave it short. When you first started treating me, you told me to read this every day. What did you see in me and in so many athletes that made you think that the mindset sort of mattered more than physical adjustment right away?
Firstly, Drew, thanks for having me on in my own studio. And it's really great to sit down and have a chat with you. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. I think the most important thing about that is many people, if you help them physically, mentally, they can self-sabotage. And we could sort of almost see the potential in you and the potential for sort of what you should be, what your birthright was, or what the level of sort of talent and ability you had, and you weren't matching that. And so that passage is a great way of, when you read it slowly and carefully, and you think, what part doesn't resonate, what part sticks, what part don't I believe in? Because it's easy to read it superficially and say, well, that's a little woo. But if you actually read it, and you'll know the part that your brain tends to gloss over, or you're like, nah, that's the part you probably want to focus on. And you see this happening quite a lot with people that are good. It's almost like, I think it's easy to understand with artists. Artists or very creative people will self-sabotage all the time or procrastinate rather than do what they should be doing. And there's that notion as well as like, because it's almost like, who am I to believe that I can be that talented or that good or the best in the world? And especially if you've been through struggling, a patch of struggling or really battling. So the two athletes that need to take this to heart are those who felt they weren't that talented, and then they had to work really, really hard, leave no stone left unturned. And then you get to a point where you're moving really well, or things click and the plan becomes simple and you start to understand it. It's very, very difficult for those athletes to relax into that space and say, I don't have to work as hard. I don't have to force it. And often that's when the real breakthroughs happen. So that it is a combination of those, I say.
Yeah, I just remember when I first started, when I first came to you, I was like, hey, I have my back hurts, my foot hurts, I have all these things. And I think the traditional or typical path of like, when you see someone for treatment is like, all right, let me just, adjust you, or let me, and you really started with the mindset. And you obviously did treat me, and we obviously, there were things I needed to work out, but that was very, very different. And I feel like that set such a good frame for our like working relationship of like, hey, like a lot of this stuff you got to figure out between the ears. Do you see that a lot of tension is stored in athletes? And like, do you feel like a lot of the tension is sort of this like holding yourself back, through ego and fear and sort of that mentality, and then you sort that through and you go, oh, my back doesn't hurt as bad anymore. Do you see that a lot in people?
Yeah, for sure. It's emotion and motion, and your posture, your held posture. We'd call it posture, but that's your how you move is your posture in motion. That's your emotion. They're very, very linked. But I'm going to take it back for the listeners. I'm going to paraphrase Drew. Drew said, I don't know why I'm here. My mom, coach, sent me. Everyone says they can help me, but no one can. And if I don't sort this out, I think you said I'm going to retire. So
that's probably accurate.
Yeah. So it wasn't surprising that we thought like we might work a little on our mental game.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
You know, it wasn't that subtle. You know, this wasn't some ooh. You know, you were pretty despondent and beat up, and I saw nothing but potential in you. And I think also, you know, people that have worked hard and struggled at some point, it's almost like you build up a sense of resilience and toughness. And when you get a second opportunity or a second bite, those people tend to not drop the ball. And what you want to do is set the stage for really expressing yourself and really fulfilling your true potential. But to get back to sort of posture like tension, I think people, especially in this country, in the USA, tend to conflate tension with strength. And so there's a lot of cues increase tension, but tension is the opposite of strength. I mean, you can explain this differently because you're the elite runner, not me, right? But when you, generally speaking, you want to let go of tension to run your best. And I think there's a lot of cues, there's a lot of, in the rehab and the strengthening, we associate tension with some form of integrity or strength. And generally speaking, a tight-held muscle is a weak muscle or a low-performing muscle, and you kind of need to let go to run your best.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember like when I first started, you know, working with you, you were like, I kind of like, you know, you said, I was way too nice about, you know, when I first started working with Lawrence. He's right. I was sort of like desperate, but you said to me, you're like, I kind of like that working with people that are, you know, desperate because you're willing to, you know, almost die to yourself to this plan and commit to what I'm telling you to do. And because of that, we can have a great working relationship together. But I remember just sort of, you know, being in that spot where I was like, hey, like everything sort of aches, everything sort of hurts. I know it's all connected, but I don't know how. Yeah. And you helped me a lot. Do you sort of touched on it a little bit, but high performers, the easy job for us is to get physically fit. It's easy for me to wake up and train hard. It's easy for me to wake up, you know, and want to do that. Yeah. But we are emotionally restricted. And what do you think when, you know, you've worked with a lot of triathletes, a lot of runners, do you think that emotional restriction is something that is something that you can actively work on? Or is it something that, you know, is going to, you know, just be a constant in your life, you know, your running career that you have to sort of like fight against and just keep coming back to? Or do you think that's something you can actively like, all right, let's work on this?
I think like, let's say it's your mental game or your mental and emotional game, you know, you're using the word in that context, emotional. It's turtles all the way down. So what'll happen is on some superficial level, you'll be doing really great. You'll be inspired. You'll be motivated. You've got a great team. Everything's great. Okay. And then generally speaking, it's going to be not great because that's just the cycle of things. Like we have night and day, we have seasons. So you're going to cycle through periods. So, you know, it's not about this picture perfect, everything's idyllic. And calm seas don't make for a good sailor. So you need to understand, if you want to become resilient as an athlete, you need to weather storms and you need to be a problem solver and you need to go through hard times. That's for sure. And I think each time there's just always another lesson and always a deeper level of understanding. I really do think in terms of, you know, something I'd like to chat about is like, I'll just derail the conversation, is like at the moment there's a absolute upwelling and of talent and resetting what we thought was possible in running, and it's happening in triathlon too. So suddenly there's just, you know, I don't know, young kids are running world best 800 meter times, you know, or US best 800 meter times at school level, which is unheard of. And there's been big breakthroughs in running in time, and a lot of it is not from outworking someone else or wanting it more or trying harder. So people are figuring out this sort of sense of nuance, right? This, you know, when the, you know, you're baking a cake and it doesn't flop. And I think a lot of times people try too hard, get the balance wrong, are too polarized in one direction. I mean, let's make no mistake, you know, an athlete, an elite runner is like a samurai sword. It can cut one way, sideways, the flat of the blade is not great. Mm-hmm. You know, most elite runners, can't play football, you will break. You're
Yeah.
very purpose and specifically built, or you're training yourself into a purpose-built person. So it's an interesting point, but I do think that the greats tend to have an incredible amount of self-belief. Or, I mean, sometimes you get an insecure overachievers. They have no self-belief and they just massively overcompensate. But generally speaking, you really need to trust your plan. Mm-hmm. You need to trust your team, and you need to focus on yourself and figure that out. And I think, today's world, it's so easy to be pulled apart, distracted, focusing on what other people are doing. And there's a lot of elites that were great, and suddenly, like, everyone's just leapfrogged past them, and they have no idea. And the narrative that they believed in, I just find it extraordinary. They were confident, and this is how it is, and this is how we do things around here, and this is what makes great athletes, and it's what they did, and their whole formula is not good enough. And so it's an interesting time that we're in, where, I think to compete at the level that's currently out there, I think you really do have to have a real sense of synergy, and synergy's definition is the parts add up to greater than the sums. Like it's like a puzzle that all the pieces fit.
Yeah. And
it doesn't have to be perfect, but you really do need to be thinking the whole game, because otherwise you're not going to have synergy. It's not going to be win-win, and you're not going to get something special.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. I do think that, especially now, all the, you can sort of look at all the elite athletes, you can see what their training is, you sort of know what everyone's doing. And it's not that what I'm doing versus what Jakob Ingebrigtsen's doing isn't crazy different. No. Similar systems, we're doing similar trainings. I know he does hill repeats, I know he does threshold. But there's a reason that he's been dominant for so long. And it's because, like you were saying, like, he has all the pieces of the puzzle together. He has the mindset, he has the confidence, he has the system that he stayed healthy in, I guess, until last year. But really, that was something that I guess I just didn't think a lot about until we started working together, which is sort of sounds stupid because, like, I've been doing this for so long.
Yeah.
But it wasn't something I was actively thinking about. I kind of came to you and was like, hey, like, I have all these physical problems, I need them fixed. And you were like, let's zoom out a little bit here. So that was different. I wanted to know, your background isn't necessarily a niche in running. You, as you've sort of explained to me a little bit, you weren't good at running, so you wanted to learn more about running. Can you talk about just that hunger and drive to understand running and how that's helped you now help runners?
Yeah, I don't know, Drew. I think we see this differently, because when I was still a student, I started massaging really good runners, like Comrades runners. We had Joe Klecker on, you had Joe Klecker on here the other day, and his dad ran Comrades, and we were talking about that. So I was looking after Comrades runners as a sort of a side hustle while I was still a student, and massaging them. And by the time, so that was like in the end of 4th year or 5th year, and then it took me 8 years to get my degree. It took a long time for my research to clear. So I studied for 6 years, and then I had sort of like a practical. But by the time I opened my practice, I was treating Olympic gold medalists. So on the day that my practice opened, I had the South African marathon record holder and Josiah Tugwani, the Olympic gold medalist, flying into town for treatment on the first day of my practice. So I don't like. I was immersed in running while I was still a student. While right from the get-go. Obviously, I trained as a chiropractor. So running, for whatever reason, almost chose me, and these runners trusted me, and I worked with, I think a beautiful thing was I worked with a lot of African runners, and, they're about feel and rhythm. That often express to me that they have a restriction or something blocking them from running like they want to. They weren't that concerned with pain. So a lot of the time they wouldn't say like, yeah, my knee hurts, but that's not the problem. That's not what's stopping me from earning a living. They were kind of stoic, I guess is the right frame of mind for that. And they'd say, but my hip doesn't want to flow through anymore, or this foot hits the ground funny. They'd be pretty obsessed with not moving well. And I think that really helped me sort of think about, how do I get someone whose main complaint is I just don't feel like I'm moving well. And the other one is comrades running is a sport of consequence. It's ultra distance running. It's 90 kilometers, about 60 miles, but they run on road. And if you work on someone and then they go and do a 50 or 60K training run on the road, they got a lot of time to think about what you did to them. And I think that sort of working with them right from the get-go, almost at an elite level before I ever worked with amateurs, was pretty special, and I think that gave me a real sense of trying to understand what it is that these guys want, because if you're not helping them, you're of no good. And then also if you don't do a good job, they've got a lot of time to think about what they didn't like about that. And so I like the consequence of that. But so that's a bit of a back end story. And then so I've always been working with runners. In the US, I worked with triathletes. I just haven't worked with elite runners that much in the US when I moved. But in South Africa, I worked with all the greats, all the best, non-stop, all the time. But I also was very varied. I worked with rugby players. I did fitness. I did conditioning. I eventually did my own strengthening and rehab. We used to dry needle. I worked with cricket players, surf lifesavers, Olympic swimmers. I worked in road accident, like testifying in court as an expert witness in road accident claims and motor vehicle trauma. In rugby, we were rehabilitating concussion. So I had a very, very broad-based sort of perspective, and also I coached athletes. So I was a running coach as well. So I think I've worn many, many hats, and I was very, very generalized, but just blessed and fortunate to work with very good runners, and they trusted me. It's amazing. Like they let me help them when I probably had no business helping them, but I always learned and tried to figure it out, and studied and read up and really tried to immerse myself to help people. So
when you were treating elite athletes, and you would go after work or before work, and you go out for a run, did you start to almost like think about, okay, how are my hips moving? How am I moving through space? Because obviously you get to help all these people, and they come in and they say my knee hurts or my hip hurts, but you're the ultimate test subject, right? You get to sort of see like, okay, let me put this to practice. Did you start thinking about your own running?
Yeah, I thought about my own running a lot, and I was never able to run well and express that running, and I couldn't understand why. My running was, I did triathlon. My swimming was world class. I could come out in the front pack in an elite field in a 70.3 and a 9-man. My cycling was moderate, but it never really felt like, there was a hard ceiling on it. My running was diabolically bad, and it literally took me decades. I was treating elite runners for 30 years, and before I figured out what was wrong with myself, and how badly, let's just for phrase term, how stuck behind my hips it was. And for me, it was a very powerful experience. So once I figured out how to undo that and change that, what happened, I actually did it walking, but what happened was my whole nervous system sort of calmed down. It was a very powerful, almost spiritual experience for me, because I realized the one way I was doing it was creating a sense of anxiety, tension, frustration. I was working too hard. I knew all these things, but it just didn't work. Let's say my blood lactate just went up. Running was just hard and unnatural and never, ever really felt good. And I walked and I was like, oh God, this is totally different. This is not what I've been doing. And once I figured that out, now I'm pretty kind of dogmatic in the way I work, because I'm really interested in people finding that sense of real, true authenticity of this is what I need to do with my hips, and this is how I run, because it is so powerful. And it's kind of, you've experienced it, so you can explain it in a different way, but you get to the point where you go, this somehow gels with my nervous system, or this all works together, and this starts to make sense. And when I first started working with you, I was kind of trying to explain to you in different ways what was showing up in your body, and you were like, oh yeah, I get it, but you didn't really get it. Now you have a totally different frame and understanding, where you start to realize, these all have to work in synergy and together. Yeah. And to go back to your mental and emotional point, is once your body starts working together in synergy, is not fragmented, often your understanding your life and your mindset starts to become synergistic. So you definitely get bigger, let's say, almost performance boost out of this kind of work than you would if things are all fragmented for you, if you don't have that sense of the big picture.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a good way of you sort of describing it to me, because I think we're so in, like Western society, we want, give me a cue, or, tell me my hips need to be this angle, or, we're looking for that because that's how we've been conditioned for most of our life. And you sort of opened up the space in my running to be like, well, how did that feel? And how did that feel? Did you like that? Like, did you, after we started, having, when I started seeing you regularly for treatment and having conversations, I think really that was what was most powerful, was talking about all this stuff. I just remember I had this constant back issue that I don't even think about anymore. And we focused so little on the treatment of that area. And it was more, like you said, getting my body to work together and not work against it. So it is something that, was different for me. I think a lot of people will, listening to this podcast, are runners, but you mentioned it. You've worked with a lot with triathletes. Can you just talk about what you've learned about running from the triathlon world? We kind of have funny rants about this, but I want you to talk about it because I think it's interesting and good to hear. I might get you in trouble, but sorry.
I think there's a notion, and this is just description for purpose of understanding. Okay, so don't burn me at the stake, or get too dialed down on the details. Let's just focus on really big picture, right?
Yep.
So elite runners run fast. That's why they're elite. And to run at an elite pace, you kind of have to use your body pretty well. So you're there or thereabouts. There might be low-hanging fruit. There might be opportunity to improve. But generally speaking, if you're injury-free, running the mileage that you need to run to be an elite runner, you're not doing too bad, right? Triathletes can come, almost like me, from a very, very different space, where they were elite swimmers or really good cyclists, and now they're running, and they're not elite runners. And so I know it's extraordinary, but they can be almost like me. You can be trapped behind your hips, or you can actually be moving really not well at all. Like, let's say you're just jumping down the road furiously. Rather than running, okay? With respect, and with respect, that's what I did for 20 years, okay? I was like road jumping, not running, okay? So I think there's a notion of it is interesting, and so you can be pretty disorganized, and you can have pretty wrong patterns, and you can still be pretty competent in that space, and you might think it's good enough. So I think that's one thing, and I think the other big fact is cycling. Cycling, you generate power with your knee in front of your hip, and pretty much with your hip at a 90 degree, or even less than a 90. So your knee's close to a 90 degree angle, but your hips at an acute angle, or less than, it's closer to your chest than 90 degrees, right? And in running, you generate power, you land, you travel forward, and then you need to generate power, which a lot of people don't get. And basically, you're generating power with your hips in extension, which is very, very far removed from cycling. And I think it's in the biggest frustration point, I'd say, with runners is that in triathletes are often working on turnover or increasing their cadence. And generally speaking, you increase your cadence by picking your feet up off the ground, which increases hip flexion. Okay. And you're kind of supposed to, if you run a swim, let's say in swimming, you'll see an elite and they look effortless and they got glide and they got length, and you're like, oh my word. It's, runners have the same sense of really big stride length, and they do that by traveling forward and then having an impulse, not landing and immediately trying to get your foot up off the ground. If you put a metric on them, you have a look, you say, oh, you have decreased ground contact time, your cadence is X. But, I think the big frustration for triathletes is they try and solve that problem directly or first order thinking. So causation and causality are not the same. So, rich people might drive Bentleys and Ferraris. If I buy a Ferrari, it doesn't make me rich, it makes me very poor. Okay? So elite runners might have an elite cadence or elite tendon stiffness. But if I try and increase my cadence, that doesn't make me elite. And I think there's a frustration point in there. and it's difficult because a triathlete, and with respect, because they're getting very, very good and the standards very, very high, are often jack of all trades but a master of none. And also have been taught or cued. So they to your point about degrees and angles and what you should and shouldn't be, they tend to be over cued and possibly overthinking it, and kind of a slave to it. So there's the common vernacular is, this is how it's done, this is what you need to do. They don't want to be seen as the triathlete with low cadence.
Yep.
Yeah, because that just shows you're not doing the work or showing up. So triathlon's an interesting space where I think they're trapped in a paradigm at the moment, and it's not necessarily helping them.
Yeah. You were just in Kona. Can you talk a little bit about that experience? Because that's like the Super Bowl for triathletes. And I honestly just want to go and watch and observe at some point because it looks incredible. And but can you just talk about that experience, what that was like, and just sort of being, like a part of that world?
Yeah, that was, Kona was amazing. But let's back it up. So I went to Nice as well, which is so that they split the men's world champion, the male and female world championships. And I think more to my point is in Nice, the men's performance were absolutely extraordinary. I mean, the winners, I think he ran at 2:26. It was just really, really quick.
Yeah.
I mean, the greatest of all time previous, guys that have won Olympic gold medals that could run 29 minutes off the bike. They're 15 minutes off that marathon time.
That's
like
incredible.
it's, like Javi Gomez, Jan Frodeno, Alistair Brownlee, they really struggled or maybe didn't break 240. To have someone running at 225 off the bike. And I think the top 5 men all ran sub 235. So I think that's this point, is like the level has risen and the cheese has moved, and everyone, if you wanted to have some unsolicited advice, it's you need to start thinking very open-mindedly and very clearly. And the same's happening in running. It is extraordinary, the level of performance that's coming out of it. And I don't think we're just going to get to say, oh, it's super shoes and hyperfueling,
It's everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because and the cheese has moved. Like the bar has just gone racked up, and it's at an altitude now where, I think dogma and the way it's always been might not work out for you anymore. And then the women's race was fantastic. I work with Taylor Knibb. She had a total ding-dong battle with Lucy Charles Barkley, and Lucy Charles ended up stopping and being pulled from the course because she was sort of fatigued and wobbly, and quite rightly. And then, Taylor ended up leading, and, she didn't finish. She was like 2 miles from the finish. She just sat down and she was done. Like her core temperature elevated, and that was that. She did wake up on the morning with a slight elevated core temperature, and given blood results and sort of consulting with specialists, think she probably had some sort of infection or fever in the day. And thank goodness, I think both of them have recovered. Taylor's going to race World 70.3 champs this weekend, and she did tests and fitness tests and the blood work, and it's been managed very responsibly. But Kona's special. I mean, it's hot, it's difficult. The course just gets harder and harder often. So you almost, you need to sort of make progress while it's cool, and almost like start being more conservative as it hots up, but then the race is getting more significant. Yeah. It's a real mental challenge, that course. And unfortunately for me, my personal opinion is that it shouldn't be there every year, because it definitely favors a certain type of athlete. So if you're really good in the heat, it massively favors you. And I think, you could be the best triathlete in the world and maybe not, because the conditions are pretty hot and extreme for an Ironman. And I think it's sad that you could be the best athlete in the world by a country mile and you might never win Kona. And there are athletes that just don't have the, let's say you're a very salty sweater. You just can't race that race.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think about. We've had, Reed and Connor on, and you have a bad marathon. Like, okay, you got to go again in 6 months, but Ironman is. I mean, I just can't even imagine. I like you mentioned, you've worked with Taylor. Can you talk? I think people are really interested to hear about the behind the scenes training. Like, what has Taylor really worked on in actual training, swimming, biking, running? What's been you know, like what do you feel like she's really improved on, or what things have you guys sort of been talking about and working together on? Because I think people are curious. I mean, run training, like I said, like we'll talk about it all the time, but we have you on and you know a lot more about the triathlon world. And I think people would be curious to hear what someone like a Taylor Knibb does behind the scenes.
So for Taylor, it's like the first thing was just to get her healthy and confident and trusting her training and trusting her body was a big key. And you know, just reducing the injuries. And paradoxically, that led to almost like a sense of overtraining, because before she had so many periods where she'd have to have a rest or a break from training that she almost wasn't used to just training uninterruptedly, you know, being not sick, not healthy, running basically, I don't know how many weeks she ran. I mean, she ran a whole year without really, or I mean, she had 1 or 2 sort of rest periods of just being cautious. So the big priority was just getting confidence in her body, trusting her body, and getting injury resistant. And then the other part, which is interesting for me, is like Taylor's not a natural runner. She doesn't have, I don't know, this phrase gets bandied about, and I find it interesting, like elite athlete tendon stiffness.
Okay.
So she's got pretty relaxed joints and joint space, and not the stiffest tendons in the world. And also she's really built like a runner. So there's like a cyclist. She's really built like a cyclist. So there's a notion that runners tend to have longer tibias and cyclists have longer femurs. She's got very long femurs and long feet. And if you know, so I don't think she'll ever be, I don't know, like in triathlon, people probably heard of Alex Yee. I mean, he's just a beautiful, beautiful runner. And I've never worked with him, but there's no doubt that he's probably got, you know, a runner's body.
Yeah.
So working with Taylor is you want to improve the run form, but probably the number one thing with Taylor was not at the cost of a bike. Because I mean, she's gone to the Olympics for cycling.
Yeah.
In time trial, and she's, you know, American national champion in time trial, and you know, the person that she beat ended up winning gold medal at the Olympics. So Taylor is like really legitimate in that space. So it's not just you can do anything. It's like, okay, let's work on your running. Let's make sure you're injury free, and then at all costs don't compromise your ability to cycle. And so that was a really interesting and cool project and a cool puzzle. I'm very blessed that Taylor gives me a massive amount of latitude and a huge amount of trust. And I will say the trust is probably earned. But that's what goes on. And then mostly, you know, in terms of strength, she wasn't particularly strong. And so she changed. I'd say the biggest change in her strength was she started just doing hex bar lifts, and she started training that twice a week and started to increase the weight on that. And it took a while, and you were very safe, but she really liked once she got strong at that. She felt it reflected into her swimming, into her posture, into her presence. And then that was like a big shift. Like I don't know, because it's hard to say like everything that happened or didn't happen, but that was one of the big shifts, is getting physically strong by lifting heavy, very safely and very graduatedly. I think was a big confidence boost for Taylor, and she certainly felt more confident in the water. And then otherwise, yeah, it's just, you know, she swims, bikes, and runs and lifts twice a week. And I will say, because I think this is of value for the listeners, is my philosophy on lifting is, like, let's say in running, some people say you should lift on your hard days, like after a hard session, after a long run, because the lifting makes you fatigued and you're going to stress yourself all on the same day. Taylor lifts on her easy days. Okay, so she only swims and lifts on a Monday and on a Thursday. She doesn't do anything else. Sometimes she might do a light bike or a light run. And I think that if your lifting complements your running, if you lift, you feel better the next day. So she basically lifts the day before key workouts. So lifting on Friday makes her run better on Saturday. And I think when I first mentioned that to you, you were like, no. And now?
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment on that. I love what you said, like lifting should aid the running.
Yeah.
I think there's this idea, like I used to do exactly that. It was like my Tuesdays and Friday workout days, I'd have like an insanely hard workout in the morning. I'd lift later in the afternoon, and then I would get out for a double and just be destroyed. And like, it was just stupid. But now I lift on my days actually after my big sessions.
Yeah.
I don't get sore from lifting anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And my run the next day feels amazing. And that was a big light bulb switch for me. Like that was like that was a very, that was something I had to sort of change my mind on. And so it's cool to hear that, Taylor does that as well. And I think like a lot of people out there listening will find that interesting. And I would definitely recommend doing that as, having lifting a part of your program, but not having it be this, let's get strong and sore and, like beat yourself up. Like lifting should aid running. That does sort of actually lead into, I wanted to talk about Lawrence van Lingen's core tenets of, your program and some of the stuff you did with me and Taylor to sort of help us find, movement patterns that were good for our running. There's a few things I just want to list off about. I want you to talk through all of them. This may take, a few minutes, but I want you to talk about the flow rope, walking the tire, backwards walking, and then the happy hip hack, and then, the drills that come from that. So can you just talk through some of the things that you started added to my program almost right away?
Yeah. Okay. So I think the big picture, right? Like real simple. If you go online, I've talked about anterior chain and posterior chain, which I'm trying to move away from because it's kind of good versus bad. I think if you want to distill out in running, what's very, very important is realizing that 80% of running forces are vertical. Okay, that's straight up and down. So the vast majority of your energy expenditure is literally getting off planet Earth and getting airborne. And when you're in the air, you can't get injured and you're very efficient. Okay, so it's a really good strategy. The way to do this is not to hit the ground hard. Okay, the way to do that, so let's say like one of my favorite movies, Kill Bill, you got to sort of punch the post. The way to do that is to land softly and then press the earth away. You can't hurt yourself. So it's not about hitting the ground hard. It's like actually landing softly, but having a pretty strong or confident pop off the earth, right? Mm-hmm. When you do that, your femur relative to your hip is translating downwards towards the ground. It's extending, it's going backwards, okay? And it's also gently internally rotating. And that's the magic sort of ingredient that you really want dialed. If you have that, you can sort of solve the puzzle outwards. But if you don't have that internal rotation, extension, and downward translation of your hip, everything sort of tightens up, and it's literally, that's what I call getting stuck behind your hips. So that's the aim, that's the goal, that's the clear path. You want to figure that out. If you do, probably you're going to really enjoy your running and what happens afterwards. And if you don't figure out, well, good luck. I've been there, done that. It's not a place I'm going back to.
Yeah.
Okay. So the immediately we started but what happens when you do that? You tend to travel, your foot's on the ground and your hip tends to travel further on a connected leg than most people are used to, especially if you've been picking your feet up quite quickly.
Yep.
And so injury prevention, number one way is walking backwards. You go soft toes, heel down, and the heel hits the ground behind your hip and your knees behind your hip. So you're practicing that sort of shape of sort of delayed hip extension or hip drive. And it's very, very good for lengthening out your Achilles a little bit. It's great rehab for someone with a calf injuries or Achilles injuries. And you basically prepping your body for the change that's going to come. And also we can practice contralateral movement, which again, don't get too, I'll explain exactly what contralateral movement is, but you're practicing that pattern. And typically if you just add backwards walking 5 minutes a day, 1 kilometer an hour, which is really slow and mindful, someone's running will change within a week to 10 days. You'll pick it up. You can just see it. And you experience that pretty quickly. I mean, you went, if my memory serves correctly, you went from pretty beat up and unhappy to pretty happy in about, 3 to 4 weeks?
Yeah, totally. And the first thing was the backwards walking.
Yeah. Okay. So that's backwards walking. We use the flow rope. The flow rope adds sort of elements that are great. One is it helps you understand head over foot timing.
Okay.
And I'm going to reframe that. It's stepping out of head over foot timing because everything's just extension, hip extension. swinging the rope away from you also helps pattern your fascia. So it really helps people that are herky-jerky or disconnected, or let's say you move from the outside in a lot, or you just don't find some sort of synergy or balance in your body or fluidity. Like just swinging the flow rope, because it's always moving away from you, ends up really helping, and it decompresses a lot of people's spine. So your spine is basically really compressed and twisted. So flow rope would have mobilized your thoracic spine, your rib cage, allowed you access to sort of more fluid movement or a bigger space to move in. A lot of people are so tight and constrained, you almost can't express healthy movement because you're just too tight. So the flow rope starts to paint you out of a corner and open up doors. And it's pretty handy at that. And again, 5 minutes a day is enough. The pattern you want is backward figure of 8 swinging, because it kind of gets your shoulders off your hips. Okay, so that would be a big deal. The tire walking is, now we're taking backward walking and we want the same pattern but going forward, because it adds people can walk forwards and backwards all day long, and it's amazing. And you add a little bit of resistance to them, or I just grab you by the belt and hold you back a bit, and then your hip can't actually express itself with a bit of resistance. Mm-hmm. So that the tire sort of helps you understand, the point, and I've just said running's all vertical, but there is a forward component to it. And the tire, it's not a big resistance, it's not really difficult, it often looks harder than it is, but it strengthens your hips in that pattern, so you can almost like step with confidence, which I'm sure you've experienced. Mm-hmm. And then the happy hip hack is, we talk about contralateral movement, and most people are familiar with bird dogs as rehab. Your right arm's in the air and your left leg's in the air, and there's this crawling pattern or contralateral pattern through your body, which is equal and opposite, which is what running is. Your upper body needs to be basically doing exactly the opposite of what your lower body's doing. So if your right hand's forward, I'm going to think about this. If your right hand's forward, your left leg's forward, mm-hmm. And the opposite's happening on the opposite side. What's a really big revelation for me is the safest way to set that up is length on one side. So getting your shoulder away from your hip mm-hmm. will put you into contralateral rotation. And a lot of people are trying to sort of create contralateral, or we were talking about this the other day, watching a very, very symmetrical runner where his hands and feet were perfectly balanced. And I said, yeah, but look closely, his spine's compressed and distorted. So he has a central twist, but he moves well on the outside. What you really want to do is get your shoulder away from your hips, and that puts you into the correct rotational pattern. And that's the happy hip hack. The happy hip hack teaches you a homolateral or crawling pattern that precedes a contralateral pattern. So it's further upstream. And if you solve the problem, the further upstream you can solve a problem, generally speaking, the better the outcome and the simpler the outcome, and the less reactive the outcome. Whereas I think a lot of people are just playing whack-a-mole, or you're just putting out fires and you just going from one thing to the next to the next. If you can think clearly and upstream, you can set yourself up for quite a bit of success. So the happy hip hack creates healthy rotation through length on one side.
Yeah, totally. I witnessed, all this in myself. I'm curious from your perspective, watching me, when you first started watching me run, what did you see? And now when you see me run, what is sort of like, am I 80% there? Am I 90% there? I'm allowing you to be critical with me right now on camera. So there's nothing, people love, people want to hear sort of like, I've been elite since I was, really, really, high school. But it's amazing that I'm still working on running at, the age of 28. So I would just love to hear, like, when you first started working with me 2 years ago to now, what do I still need to work on? But what things have I greatly improved upon?
The answer is you're 80% there, Drew.
Okay. That's not bad. That's a B-, right?
Well, it's just refinement. And the main thing is, I think you enjoy your running, you're invigorated by it, you're inspired by it, you reframed it, you've got a really healthy relationship with your running, which is just, if you just keep that mix going, mm-hmm. It's almost like you're starting to get momentum, and we're not going to change what we're working on. It's just the same, and you're just going to get better and better at what you're doing. Which is interesting. So like we trust the formula. Well, I trust the formula. I hope you do. But it's just the same narrative, and it's just getting better at the same narrative. When I first met you, you didn't have length on your right side. And you said, like, I want length. You just got to open it up. You got to create space. It's just so tight. So generally speaking, we tighten. A sort of way I look at it is tension creates a twist or asymmetry, and you had a big asymmetry and a lot of tension in your body. And that's why you could have such a big result in such a short period of time. Is just unwinding that tension created the ability for you to express and move better, where you were so tight. A lot of the tension was in your hip flexors, which is compressing your lower back and messing with your breathing. And so, like, in your running, you could see that, like, it just kicked your ankles way too far in front of you. And so your head was forward. We kind of term this anterior chain is tight. So you sort of, the whole front of you was tight. Your head was thrown forward. Your ankles were being thrown forward. You were overreaching. And with an asymmetry, with quite a strong twist. And then the other one I'd say is you had it in your head that you should pull back with your hamstrings to run. You were hitting the ground backwards.
Yeah. And
reframing that to realize, no, hit the ground down with a delay. So you land, you kind of pause, and then you have an impulse. And that impulse needs to be more vertical to get more in the air, so you have a bigger stride length, and I think you just need to keep working on that. But that's a so just for people that are listening, don't go and injure yourself immediately trying to sort of radically jump up and down. Just remember, walk backwards for a week or two just to prep the scene, and then add these cues in gently. And what we never did was I never explained it probably as clearly as I'm explaining to you now, because you do the things and we want to see those show up in your running. So when you walk the tire, it shows up in your running.
Yeah.
I can see whether you've been doing your homework or not, because it shows up in your running. You don't have to think about it. And then that's the safe way, so you don't get injured. Like, if you go out and try and purposefully and mindfully radically change the way you run mentally and emotionally, you're almost certainly going to get injured.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to be thinking about how you're running while you're actually running, which is a funny thing to say out loud, but it's like, when I was stuck in those bad patterns, I was constantly thinking about my back. Is my cadence high enough? All these things that I shouldn't be thinking about. I should just be running. I always think, like, I always say it, a good coach or a good, PT or whatever, they should help the athlete get out of their own way. That's their, like, help the athlete, let their talent come through, let their potential shine. And your job is to help them not think about any of the noise. Yeah. And you really help that with, with my running. And it's just like, you're right. Like, hey, do these things, we'll do treatment, but, really you're going to feel it. And then once you feel it, you're going to know, this is how I want to run.
Yeah. And you own the process, because, the more you explore and understand, and the more things come to you, that gathers momentum, and you start to trust your process, you start to trust your movement, and it really is about you. I mean, it's all about me, but
yeah, totally.
It's really about you. Like, does Drew understand and trust his process? And you the more you think, you can almost see someone that's overthinking their running, and we can certainly see it in golf. Go and overthink your golf swing and see how that works out for you. Yeah. So a lot of the work is done away from running, and then you go for a run and you just see what expresses, and we do talk in pictures and paint pictures, so that you kind of know, it gives you a map or a description of the terrain, so that you understand the terrain that's coming. So we'll often say, this is probably going to show up in your running, or this is what it would feel like, so that when those things arrive, oh, that's good. I know about this, I'm going to keep this, or I'm going to reinforce that pattern, rather than saying you should do this. It's really important, if you look at a runner, or if you want to help people with movement coaches, you should never give them a cue that they can't physically do, because they're going to feel they're dumb at movement. Okay, so it's like in math, give the child or the adult a problem that is challenging, but that they can solve. Yeah. And then you can build from there. But if you give them, a math problem that they can't solve, they're going to think they're bad at math. Yeah. And so, it's that delicate balance of really helping you understand the process of, when you run, not thinking, getting out of your head, feeling more, and creating a really healthy relationship with your running and what that feels like. And a lot of people are just, even with like with the modern sort of monitoring equipment, are just over analyzing it and are pretty pulled out of their physical experience. Too much data, too analytical, overcoached, overcued.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want sort of like your advice to people listening to this. Is there a way to, you talked about it a little bit, is there a way to practice these things while you're actually out training? Because I think like some people are, they're going to listen to this and they're going to say, okay, I want to do these things, but you're not there to treat them. You're not there to, like have an eye on them. Do you have just sort of generic practical advice on how they could like slowly sort of start to raise awareness around how they're running and how they're moving through space, and how just a 3-hour marathoner could work on their run form, or just anybody really that wants to improve on these things?
Yeah, that's kind of what I do. I've got a ton of YouTube resources out there. I've got an online community teaching people this. Like, it's as simple as saying, just do the happy hip hacks, figure out that pattern, then skip in that pattern, and then go for a run and don't think about it. The problem is that like the number one stumbling block I see, or as we just discussed, walk backwards 5 minutes a day, 1 kilometer an hour with the correct form. You can go on YouTube and just Google my name and YouTube, and we explain how to walk backwards. And just your running will improve for the better. I can almost guarantee it. When it doesn't, is people don't figure out how to move their hips properly, and they don't have an awareness of how locked their hips and their pelvis is. And so all their running is a compensation around a problem that they can't solve. That would be the number one stumbling block, and we see this sort of all the time. I've got people that have been in my community for 6 months, and eventually they go, oh, I'm stuck behind my hip, and my entire movement is a compensation around the hip. So I think, that's what I kind of need to do some YouTube videos on now, is like saying, do you understand that it's a non-negotiable that you have to be able to use your hip properly? Otherwise, it's just going to get a hot mess, and you're going to get frustrated, and it's going to make it worse. So just anyone that's listening to this, like, you really, really, really need to understand that your hip must translate down. The femur goes down, it internally rotates, and it extends. And a lot of people it doesn't, and a lot of like front side or sprint running or sprint mechanics, you stay externally rotated through your run stroke, through your run stride. And that, there's many reasons. You ride a bike too much, you fell on your butt in the snow multiple times, you sat too much in kindergarten, flexion, I don't know. There's many reasons why you can get stuck behind your hips. But if you're stuck behind your hips, like I did, I was stuck behind my hips for 25 years, and no one explained how, all my whole life. And there was running before and there's running afterwards, and they're not the same. Yeah,
totally. How, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but super shoes, they can help you in this process. That was something that also we've talked a lot about. Can you explain how the new shoe technology can really, really help, you find your perfect stride and find a stride that you feel good in?
Yeah, I think, I had a great chat with Paul McKinnon, the balanced runner, about this, and like his point was super shoes are 4%, like the one was called 4%.
Yeah.
The range was people responded 1% to 7%. Okay.
Yeah.
So they averaged it to 4. It's really interesting, and he's pretty aligned with me on this, is that, if you think about the compressive foam and the spring out and the carbon plate that acts as a spring, so basically you've got trampolines underneath your feet, you're probably going to be a responder if you understand you have to press that shoe into the ground and bounce back out of it, and time you're running with the bounce out. So let's say, if I have a swing, I'm going to go with the swing and then flick with the swing. I'm not trying to, as the swing comes up, whack it with my hand. I'm going to hurt my hand. So, the bounce, you need to go with the bounce, not against the bounce. It's not about hitting your foot harder into the ground. It's about, timing your muscles to contract out of the ground with your shoe, and that will propel you forward. And people that do that are responders, and they respond more than 4%. And I think it's part of the reason you get a lot of people with a big breakthrough. You know, in a lot of North American runners have been taught to hit the ground backwards or pull back or paw back, or you're doing a lot of B skips. You know, I just, you probably, if you dial down on that, and that's a big part of your running, sort of how you run and how you express yourself running, you probably find you're not as big a responder to those shoes. You know, it's amazing that people that don't overthink it, don't do too many drills, put the shoes on, think and feel and respond to the shoe and try and get the maximum out of the shoe, really seem to be big responders. You know, and these are the guys that are just tearing it up. You know, didn't try too hard, didn't overcomplicate it, didn't overthink it, just felt and responded. And so I from that point of view, I really like the super shoes, that the fact that it's made running healthy again, or made running bouncy again, or vertical again.
Yeah.
But obviously you need to strengthen your feet. And, you know, they do come with a government health warning. You know, like,
Yeah, I was going to say, can you talk about that? Like, what are some of the downsides of the new technology?
So I think, you know, I work with triathletes. So let's say Taylor's a good example. Her ankle's a little bit unstable. So think about this. You're further away from the ground. So it's very common that you'll have someone that's totally balanced and can stand with a neutral ankle barefoot. So if you stand barefoot, their ankle alignment's fantastic and they have good balance. Okay. If you lift them up, sort of, what's the legal limit now? 44 millimeters, I think, off the ground on a soft foam, you'll find that they just standing on one leg, you'll roll in on your ankle. Mm-hmm. Okay. It doesn't have to be that way. So if you think about someone in stilettos, you have to straighten out your ankle mechanics or you will roll your ankle. So super shoes can be the same. So sometimes super shoes really clean up people's mechanics. I had, way back in the day when Hoka came out, this was almost pre-super shoes. I had a triathlete with really, you know, questionable biomechanics and sort of alignment or stack, if you want, whatever the word is that you want to use for it. And she put on a pair of Hokas, and like her crossover gait improved, her pronation improved. She looked fantastic in about 30 seconds in those shoes. And I said, and this company wants to pay you to run in their shoes.
Sign me up.
Just take it with both hands.
Yeah.
And she was kind of a bit like you know, the year before she said, if I can't win a race, I can't really call myself a pro, I'm going to retire. And I think that year she won six pro races. It just totally changed the trajectory of her career. So I think there can be massive upside, but if you're standing in and rolling and excessively pronating and collapsing in them, you might find that they make you really injury prone. So that's the big elephant in the room, or not the big elephant, but get real clear that you're on the right side of those kind of mechanics.
Yeah.
It gets bandied about. I see on Instagram, like, pronation is normal. Yes, it is normal. Excessive pronation is not normal.
Okay.
And too much angular sort of deformation suddenly in your foot might not injure you in the beginning, but later on you'll start to have less and less integrity. You'll stretch the ligaments, you'll stretch the joints, you'll start to strain muscles. Once you get small tendon injuries in your feet, they're not great at all. So just be very mindful of that. And then the second part is that carbon plate is pretty hardcore on your feet. And your feet can get pretty beat up. I'm sure you've experienced this. And so you really do want to, we use the foot fixer, sort of a big rope where you stand on and you basically open up your feet and just take the tension out of your feet. And I think, you know, swapping shoes and varying shoes and making sure that your feet are strong proactively is a really good idea. And also for people listening, as soon as you figure out hip function, and you can tell me if you experience this or not, generally people become obsessed with their feet.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Once
you figure out your hip, you go, oh my God, but my feet.
Yeah.
They're not hitting the ground. They're slapping. They're making a noise. This is not, you know, you can't stop thinking about your feet.
Well, I remember exactly that. I came in one day for a session and I was like, we'd been working on a lot of hip stuff. And I was like, Lawrence, my feet, I'm so loud when I run. And you were like, oh yeah. You're just noticing that now, you know? And so you're totally right. You do sort of have that, you see how they connect pretty obviously. Yeah.
There's a massive direct correlation between your foot and your hips.
Yeah.
You know, they're not sort of, they are mirrored basically.
Yeah. I want to wrap up soon, but I sort of want to end on, I just want you to make the pitch, or, you know, just leave people with the idea of how movement can help them live better. I think, like, you know, that's been so obvious to me through my running, but can you just, like I said, give the elevator pitch to people about how this can really transform your life if you figure out your movement patterns?
Yeah, I mean, we can get pretty deep on this, and I think as you've experienced, when you sort of have some sort of synergy in your body and you understand your movement patterns properly and you trust your body, it ripples out. You start to have a deeper sense of trust. There's this notion of like Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book, The Body Keeps the Score. We store trauma in our bodies. So there's a whole, like rabbit hole you can go down. But very, very simply is we need to move quite a bit, and we need to move in a way that's kind to our joints, and we need to get outdoors. And if you do that, like your life will change for the better. And technology is competing for our attention more and more and more. It's an interesting thing is in the industrial age with industrial labor, people got sort of wearing out their joints because of hard manual labor. And so it's almost like if hunter-gatherers are pretty kind in their joints because they trot around and they do varied things during the day, and they don't sit too much in chairs, but they don't work very, very hard. And I think it is interesting is like we need to have a sense of play and curiosity, do varied things. If you stuck behind a desk, it would be great if you could, I'll work behind my computer, then go outside, and then I'll just go in and out the whole day long and alternate. But we need nature, outdoor, we need light, natural light. And movement, but movement in a way that's kind to your joints. You can train too hard. And this is a topic for another conversation, is like a whole bunch of health influencers and leaders in the whole injury and self-care space. I mean, they're all destroyed. They got hip replacements, back surgery. They're not doing so well.
Seems like a conflict of interest.
Yeah, seems like a conflict of interest. You can almost over-strengthen or over-rehab or overwork your joints. So there's an element of art or art, sophisticated. It's like music, I know, I understand. I mean, this is again topics for other conversations. Is I think Salazar once said, like, it doesn't have to be pretty. You just got to make it work. And I think it is interesting. I think if you want to be a professional runner for sure and a professional triathlete, I think you need to move well because that's your job.
Yeah.
And And why I say that is like, imagine saying, well, I want to be a professional musician, but I can't play well. You know what I mean? I'm not good at my job.
Yeah.
And I think the take home for most people is realize there is a sense of you can't just smash it. You can't just say, I've done my rehab and now I get to deserve to run injury free. Like there is a nuance to this. There is stimulus and pause and response and timing and loaded and graded movement, which I think, I know it sounds bizarre, it's pretty absent.
Yeah.
And then there's a notion of like, if my muscles are big, I'll be strong and injury proof. Like that's not how it works. Like often the most injured people around are hypertrophic or real strength bodybuilders. They move terribly, someone that can, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, for instance, is often not very athletic and couldn't jump or couldn't run around a basketball without getting injured. So I think we really got to think on the quality of movement. And if you're thinking like, oh God, that's overwhelming. No, that's play. That's being curious. That's tossing a Frisbee every now and again. That's getting outdoors and varied terrain, varied lifestyles. But, once that happens, you sleep better. And there's a thing called heart rate variability. You want your heart to be variable, not chronically stressed. And the best way to increase your heart rate variability is through sleep. And most people don't sleep well anymore because they don't spend enough time in natural light. The biggest times for natural light is first thing in the morning and dusk and dawn. Get outside, play, mow the lawn, do some gardening, take your dog for a walk. But those are the key elements, and your whole quality of life will definitely improve.
Yeah, it's crazy how even just in my own life, like if I'm spending too much time online, I literally need to go out and touch the grass.
Yeah,
like. Literally.
With your feet.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll automatically feel better or read a book or, do some of those things, but also move, and that's what I feel like you have provided a lot of value to not just runners, but, like anyone who just wants to live a little bit better and feel better, in their body. So, yeah.
We have I have a saying is like Mark Twain's big thing was, the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. And I strongly resonate with that. But in movement, your two most important days are the day you get up and walk okay, from the floor, like at about 18 months or so, and the day you can no longer get up on the floor and walk.
Yeah.
And you want to stretch those out as far as possible. And, it doesn't have to be complicated. Just move, look after yourself. But motion is lotion, moving and gentle walking. If you can't run, walk.
Yeah.
But that VO2 max will extend the quality of your life dramatically. And, most of us with modern medicine are going to be around for a while. So really try and set yourself up for a healthy last 3 or 4 decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Lawrence, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you letting us use your house for the studio. It's been awesome. And thank you for the conversation today. And I'm sure we're going to do this again, probably many more times. So
many more times.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. HAX Show, episode 5.